2 of what you need to know about financial aid. So in this section, we'll be speaking about free financial aid grant programs, federal and state. So federal financial aid, it comes in different forms, such as the federal Pell Grant, federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, the TEACH Grant, federal Work Study, direct student loans, as well as federal PLUS or parent loans. So we'll be speaking about these in this section. And then again, there is no absolute FAFSA deadline for federal aid other than June 30th at the end of the school year. And then the funding could be retroactive. So free money, federal Pell Grants. So this aid is awarded on the basis of financial need, and it is based on the expected family contribution, or EFC, that we spoke about in the first section. So here's an example. For 22-23 school year, a student with an EFC of 0 to 6,206 can be eligible for up to $6,895 per academic year if they are a full-time student. So one thing to note is that the amount awarded does vary with the amount of EFC, as well as the number of units a student is taking. So for example, the lower the EFC, the higher the eligibility. If a family has an EFC of 0, they're more likely to receive more Pell Grant. Same thing goes if a student is a full-time student, then they will receive more funds if eligible rather than half-time student. So if a student has an EFC of 0 and is a full-time student, they're more likely going to receive the maximum amount. And then also one thing to note is that you do receive the same amount of Pell Grant regardless of the college you will be attending. And to receive a Pell Grant, you do have to apply to the FAFSA every year. The Pell amounts change annually, so for this academic year, it was up to $6,895, but that is modified each year. And free money. There are other federal grants. So for example, your college will determine which federal grants you qualify for. There is no separate application. The FAFSA is only one application needed to apply to federal and state aid. So when applying to the FAFSA, you will be applying to federal and state aid by just applying to the FAFSA. And then one thing to note is that if you are going to a private institution, you may be required to create a CSS profile in addition to completing the FAFSA. So moving on to state aid. This is aid for residency, but there are residency requirements. And then this is aid awarded by both merit and need. So we'll be talking about the Cal Grants further on. And then the information is used from the FAFSA or California DREAM Act to establish what California aid the student is eligible for. And one thing to note is a March 2nd deadline of the student's senior year. Complete the FAFSA or California DREAM Act in order to receive the most amount of aid by March 2nd of their senior year. So moving on to the California DREAM Act and AB 540 status. So for undocumented students who have attended a California high school for 3 or more years, who have earned a California high school diploma, are eligible to apply to the AB 540 status. So AB 540 status grants in-state tuition, and therefore the students would not be considered out-of-state students. And you do have to apply for this status through the Admissions and Records Office at any of the colleges you will be attending. And then you do have to provide the student with programs as the same California resident. So what the AB 540 status does is that it gives AB 540 status students or students applying to the CADA access to the same programs as other California residents. So California state aid. So this is for California residents or also AB 540 status students attending a California college. So these students may qualify for Cal Grant, California College Promise Grant fee waiver at community colleges, which waives the enrollment fees, middle class scholarships if attending a UC or CSU, state university grants if attending a CSU, and Chafee grants are also available for former or current foster youth. And then again, just want to stress the importance of meeting that March 2nd deadline in order to receive the state aid or be eligible for the most amount of aid. And one thing to note is for the Cal Grant specifically, you do need to apply for the FAFSA or California Dream Act by March 2nd, and there also is a GPA component. So if you are at a high school, your high school will be sending your GPA in order to establish your Cal Grant eligibility. And then the entitlement program allows high school students, high school graduates attending a community college to have a second chance. So for example, at a community college, if you don't meet the March 2nd deadline, you have a second chance for eligibility of a Cal Grant if you apply by September 2nd. So this is only for community colleges. So moving on to the Cal Grants, you've heard me mention Cal Grants a bit now, so we'll be going into what the awards have. So for example, the Cal Grant A and Cal Grant B is for high school seniors and recent high school grads. Cal Grant A is for students with at least a 3.0 GPA, and family income and assets are below state ceiling. So we'll be going into then Cal Grant B. So Cal Grant B has a GPA of at least 2.0, and then the family income and assets are below state ceilings. Cal Grant B is for lower income students. Cal Grant A is for middle to lower income thresholds. And for both of these, you do have to demonstrate financial need. So here is a link to the Cal Grant income and assets. So we spoke about the importance that it has in the eligibility with a Cal Grant A or B. So here, if you go to the CSAC website and look up income and assets, you could find those asset ceilings, and then you could take a look, and depending on each family's income, you could take a look and see where you would fall in. So entitlement Cal Grants. This is available to high school seniors and those who have graduated the previous school year. So this is for California 2-year, 4-year public, private, and vocational schools. Cal Grant A and B pays full tuition at a CSU or UC, and over $9,000 a year for private institutions. So a Cal Grant B recipients receive an annual grant, and Cal Grant are renewable up to 4 years. So this is where once you receive that award, you would be able to take a look at how much eligibility you have, which Cal Grant you received, and we'll be talking about where you could take a look at your own Cal Grant and all of that in a future slide. And then one thing to also consider is if you are planning to graduate in 4 years, is also finding out how many units per semester or quarter you would have to complete in order to graduate in 4 years to make the most out of your Cal Grant if you receive it up to 4 years. So the eligibility for Cal Grant. You must be a U.S. citizen, eligible non-citizen, or eligible under the California Dream Act or AB 540 status. You must be a California resident, attending a California college or university at least half time. And then you must also use the entitlement grant at least one term of the first year you are receiving it. So these are additional resources for undocumented students. So undocumented students apply for Cal Grant and other state aid by submitting the CADA or California Dream Act application instead of the FAFSA. So you would apply for the Dream Act application. And also be sure to apply for the AB 540 status when you apply to the public college that you'll be attending. And then again, we want to stress the importance of the March 2nd deadline for qualifying for this state aid. And then still apply for the CADA to qualify for institutional aid. The CADA, by applying to CADA, you would be eligible, you would be considered for the Cal Grant as well as institutional aid. And then here are other resources for undocumented students. If you do have more questions, these are great resources to have. Immigrants Rising is this last link, and as well as other scholarships you may be eligible for. The Cal Grant. So the application requirements is complete it by March 2nd, complete and submit. So if you're doing the FAFSA or also the California Dream Act. March 2nd is very important for both of these applications. And then the Cal Grant GPA verification. So your high school, like I mentioned before, will automatically send your GPA for the Cal Grant GPA verification requirement. And then I mentioned that you can take a look once you receive a Cal Grant. If you receive a Cal Grant, you could take a look at your own status. So you could log into Web Grants for students, and here you could check your Cal Grant award 24/7. You could confirm your student's high school graduation, which is required once a student has graduated. You could also list your college, and this is actually something you have to do. You have to list the college in which you'll be attending, so that way they know where to send the Cal Grant. So that's very, very important. If you filled out a California Dream Act application, that same login is the same login as your Web Grants portal. If you filled out the FAFSA, you would have to create a Web Grants portal, but you could access it at webgrantsforstudents.org. This is very important, so definitely create that account, or if you already created an account through CADA, take a look, update the school that you're going to, or anything else that is required. And then there is a California Chafee Grant. This may not be applicable to most of you, but it is a very important resource. So if you know anyone, please share this information. So this is free money for foster youth. It provides an additional $5,000 for former or current foster youth wanting to go to college or a vocational training at an accredited college in the U.S. So this grants former and foster youth. We encourage them to apply during their senior year of high school. AB 540 status students are eligible. It is a separate application, so once you've completed your financial aid application, whether that's FAFSA or the CADA, then you would apply for the Chafee grant at chafee.csac.ca.gov.